Hey guys, it's Chris from the Ultimate Recycler. I'm in my home workshop tonight and I've got this air compressor up on the bench. It's one I picked up from a house lot deal many years ago, and it's kind of been sitting extra in my shed as a spare because I've got a shed at the back of the shop, and now that I've got a workshop at home, it's no longer a spare, it's required. So it hadn't been used for a long time. It's quite a little compact one. I like that it's on 4 little wheels. It's easy to push around. It has got an extra large motor, electric motor. It's an induction motor. It's looks like it's a 1/2 horsepower, so it's much larger than what this air compressor probably needs, and clearly someone's fitted it, and they've done a rather dodgy job just looking at the wiring here. So that, and I did plug it in quickly to see, and it has an issue. It actually blew the circuit breaker on the fuse box. So I don't know what's going on there. We'll inspect that. But seeing so I'm going to use this air compressor in my shed here, and I have going to set up for all sorts of things, including a little bit of spray painting maybe. I've just recently picked up a little sandblasting cabinet, and I'm going to need it just for general purpose workshop air compressor jobs for blowing up flat tires and blowing dust off things. So it's going to be a handy little unit. It'll roll under my bench nicely. But we're going to go through and give it a good check. We've clearly got to fix the motor issues. And if that one's not going to work out easily, we might find another motor for it. It looks like the compressor oil level's fine, but we'll drain that and put some fresh oil in anyway. We'll check out the air filter. Obviously the hose here is pretty old. I might just shorten that. But when we get it running, we'll see if the rest of it's okay. We'll give it a good check over, fix this wiring if the motor turns out to be okay. And there should be a drain plug under the middle here. We'll drain the tank just in case there's any water in there, because they do get moisture out of the air, and if you don't check them, they'll build up with quite a lot of water and eventually rust the tank out. So I thought I'd film this, and a few of you might not know what's involved in keeping your air compressor in good condition. They need a service like everything else. We're not going to worry about pulling the compressor down or anything unless it shows a problem. It's a belt drive unit, which are good. I quite like the belt drive units. They're a little bit, I think they're a little bit better quality generally than the direct couple ones. They're usually a cheaper version. It's got a pressure switch and everything. We'll have to make sure that works. So anyway, we'll hop to it. The first thing we've got to do really is see if this motor's going to be any good. So we'll plug it in and just see exactly what it's doing. It could well be the capacitor. Induction motors require a capacitor start, and if it hums and then blows the switch, well, it may just be the capacitor gone. So we'll check that out. Alright, first stage was to take the guard off, because if I'm going to test the motor, I might as well take the tension of the belt off it, and then we can get a feel for how the bearings are. Whilst we're looking at the belt, I've just noticed somewhere here that it's just about had it anyway, so I better find another belt. We've got a fair bit of leeway in that there's adjustments everywhere underneath. The motor can slide back and forward and in and out, so we should get plenty of adjustment for another belt. A33, it's an A section, which is the width of the actual belt. 33 is almost like a fan belt size, so I think we'll find one of those. I might even have some odd ones in my shed at the shop. If not, I'm sure the local garage will carry something. So we'll take that off. Tomorrow I'll go and hunt up one that's close to that, and we'll get that belt off now and we'll check the motor. So the pulleys feel good. The compressor particularly is nice and firm. I can hear the valves in it and a bit of a hiss as it turns, and the bearing very firm. So I'm sure that compressor's in good order. The motor, the bearings feel alright. There's no up and down movement. A little bit of noise, but more just probably a squeaking, just simply because it hasn't been used for a while. So I think it's a really good heavy duty motor. There's no issues there, but the issues are trying to fire it up. It was shorting out. So I'll put the camera down here. It's probably not a lot of point focusing on the motor, but we'll do that. And the power cord. We'll carefully plug this in. Okay, I don't know if you heard that. But over the other side of my shop where I had it plugged in, the light went out on that circuit. So it's blowing the trip out switch instantly. There's no hum coming from the motor at all. There we go. And the light's back on. So there's an issue electrically, and I don't think it's a capacitor. I think it's more like a direct short somewhere. Okay, I've taken the cover off the capacitor. Now when I said I thought it was the capacitor and then I said no, I thought it was a direct short, I was right on both accounts. The capacitor just sits on top of the motor. It had a bit of packing in front of the terminals so they didn't short on the housing. But underneath the back here, it's actually worn. It's rubbed right through onto the metal housing, onto the motor. And there's actually a fair indentation across the top of the motor. And I think it's actually worn through the aluminium casing into the material within. So it's shorting through there directly onto the housing of the motor. Now I'll put the capacitor back here so that it's actually not shorting out. The wires are still safe. We'll give that a quick run, but I think that should resolve the shorting problem. So we'll plug her in and see what happens. Okay, the capacitor is in a safe position. We have our power cords. We'll plug them in carefully. Excellent. Now that sounds, it's got a bit of a hum to it, but I think that's actually more just the frames vibrating a little bit. And the bolts are actually still loose where I slid it back before. But that motor seems to fire up well now. So we'll just need to insulate that capacitor. That's better, it's a bit quieter. Yeah, it's vibrating all part of the housing here, I think, because the motor's not bolted down properly at the moment. So with the capacitor, I just thought I'd need to provide some sort of insulation. I'm surprised there wasn't anything more in there, but perhaps there was initially, and someone's had a fiddle with this motor at some stage. At one end, where the terminals are, there was this folded up piece of cardboard, which seems a bit primitive, but it certainly would have worked, but it didn't insulate the housing there from the motor. Now, as with all capacitors in any situation, when they've been running, I'm not sure if these ones actually store a charge, but always short them. It's a really good habit to get into because capacitors can hold a charge and give you a real belt. So we know that's good. Now, what am I going to use to insulate this from the housing? I'll have to have a look around the shed. So I just found this empty tube of Sally's silicone in the bin, and I cut a section off the end of it and sliced it down to a suitable size, and that will be fine. That will insulate the capacitor from the motor housing, no worries at all. I'm going to actually get some silicone and glue it to there so it's actually part of the casing, just to stop it vibrating round if it happens to be a bit of a loose fit. But I think it'll go in nice and tight because the cover that goes over the capacitor, this actually squashes in fairly firm, so I think it'll be fine. But I will actually silicone this to the capacitor anyway. It's very easy to get to, and I don't have another starting capacitor in good order at the moment here. But if I do need to replace it down the track, it'll be really easy to access, so I'm not worried about having to order one now for it. We've just shown the motor works fine with this one as long as we keep that insulated. Okay, I'll get that organised now. We can screw the top back on, and that essentially repairs the motor. We're good to go. I ducked down the street today, and the local hardware had a new belt for me, so that was good. So that means we can actually have our air compressor operational, but we're going to give it a service, and I'll show you what to look for when you're servicing your air compressors. And basically we'll give it a bit of a birthday so it's ready for a long service in my shed. Okay, back to this air compressor. It's been a week or so since I filmed the first part of this video, and I've had a few other projects on the go, but I've got it back on the bench tonight. Now we're just going to give it a basic service. run you guys through what to look for as far as basic maintenance goes on an air compressor. They're often very neglected pieces of equipment, and people kind of forget to service them, and obviously you're going to limit the life of the thing. Now, I've just stuck a plastic tray under the drain plug, so the first thing we'll do is see if there's any water in here. I've never checked this before in my life, so I don't know if it's going to have water in it or not. Now, it doesn't appear to, but we will take that right out because, yeah, it does look a little bit scungy there. If you get a bit of rust build up in the bottom of the tank and it sits for a long time, you'll get the shale or the rust to actually block the hole. So even though there's no water coming out, it may actually have water in there. So I'll find a little nail and poke up in there and see if we can just make sure that it is nice and dry. Alright, I've got a screw here, this should do it. So it's important to do this regularly, and especially if you live in a humid area, because the air does have a lot of moisture in it and it will condense out inside the tank. So what do we got going on there? That's poked right up. We're not getting a rush of water. Oh, look at this. Okay. Not sure if the camera's focusing. That's really mucky stuff. That actually looks like water mixed with oil. So I think I'm going to have to actually flush this tank out a bit somehow, because it's obviously got a lot of muck in it. Okay, I think the best way to deal with that is to actually get some air pressure in there. So I'll put the new belt on and we'll just fire it up and get a little bit of air pressure happening whilst we're leaving that bung out. And we'll just see what actually comes out that bottom hole. Now, fitting a new belt's pretty straightforward. We've had the guard off because we've got the old belt off it, and it's pretty much just a matter of loosening the engine mounts and the motor mounts and putting the belt on one side and just turning the pulley around, and you just run the belt on. Now, of course, it's too slack at the moment, so we need to slide the motor back to get a good tension on the belt. So I levered the motor back and put some good tension on the belt. You don't want them too loose because obviously they'll slip. I've got about a bit over ½ an inch play in that. So you don't want them too tight either, otherwise you load the bearings up too much. So that'll probably wear in just a little bit, being a brand new belt. So I'll check it after a while, but that should be fine now. So I can plug it in, the compressor will run. We do have to check the air filter in the compressor shortly. We do have to change the oil in the compressor. We won't do that though until we've run it for a while to warm it up. But the immediate concern is to try and get some of that muck out of the tank. So it's right to run. I have to cover off this switch just to check that everything was okay in there. And I also unwrapped one of these connections just to make sure that it wasn't just twitched together and then, you know, just the electrical tape, whereas they're actually proper terminals and they've been bolted together, so they're secure. We just have to stop them shorting out and obviously make them safe so that no one can accidentally touch them. So I will just tape these up again. I could splice the wires together, solder them and put heat shrink tubing over them, but I'll leave them like this because they can be easily removed if I do have to take the motor off for any reason. I will put some large heat shrink tubing over that and then tape it as well, so just to make sure that it's safe. I don't like just tape on its own because it can lose its stickiness and basically fall off, but I'm happy that they're at least good terminals and bolted. So we're right to run it. There's a tap around here, so I'll turn this tap off so that we've got no air coming out through the regulator. And as the thing runs, it'll build up a little pressure and it should blow out the drain hole, whatever muck is in there. You can see there's some dripping out there now. It's a sort of, it's certainly oily, which is a good thing. I think the tank actually won't be rusty because of that, but I don't know why it's in there. There's no way known that the compressor oil can leak into the tank because it's actually not connected directly to the tank, unless some oil has come up through the head and down into the tank over the years. But yeah, I don't know. But at least having it oily in the tank is actually going to prevent rust. So that's a good thing, but I did want to blow some of the muck out of there, and there may be a layer of water sitting on top of that. So we'll plug it in now and just see what comes out. Well, look at that. There was a layer of oily stuff on the base and then water sitting on top of it. So I'm actually going to leave that just to drip out overnight. But yeah, certainly some muck in there and it needed doing. I was saying earlier that, you know, depending where you live, you should do this fairly regularly. Even in the colder climates, the air will have moisture in it and it condenses out inside the tank. So really good habit to get into. It's very easy to do. Most of them have got a really accessible drain plug, and just undo it. Look, if you're using your compressor a lot, do it every couple of weeks. It just stops the water building up in there and you'll prevent a rust problem. So, all right, well, let's solve that problem. We'll leave that drain overnight. I'll give it another quick run in the morning or next time I get out here, and we can put the bung back in and we can tick that off the list. Okay, back in the shed today. I've got to finish this job off. It's been a bit of a wet, cold day today, so it's a good chance to get in here. We've drained the bottom, as you saw, and the tray's over here. And it really was a reasonable amount of water and oil. Now, water will sit on top of oil, so that actually came out first, and then as you saw, the water blew out. So I'll drain that quite regularly, and anything that builds up in there should kind of wash out all the muck as well. The rest of the job's on here. Well, I've taped these connectors up. I put some more electrical tape on that one that you could see before, and I've used some heavy heat shrink tubing, some nice thick stuff. So that's made them very safe and secure. They can't possibly short anywhere. I'm happy just to leave them like that because this machine's one I'm using. If I was going to sell this compressor, I would possibly just mount them in a little plastic terminal box or something, just so that they're out of the road. But I'm happy they'll be fine there for me, and I know they're safe. All we have left to do, I've put the cover back on that. All the switches and everything seemed okay in there. We've drained the tank. We've got the new belt on. We've just got to look at the compressor itself. The air filter is in this little section, so we'll see what that's like and maybe clean it. And we've just got to drain the oil on the compressor. Now to do that, I'll run it for a little while to warm the oil up, because cold oil is quite viscous and it doesn't flow very well, whereas when it warms up it's much easier to drain out. So we'll check out the air filter first and see what's to go in here. They're usually just a little piece of foam or something. And of course you want to keep the air clean coming into the compressor, because dusty air is going to introduce grit and it wears everything out quicker. And it looks like that foam's pretty much totally deteriorated just from age. God, I can't even get it. It was just a little bit of a foam sort of disc, and it's all breaking apart. In fact, look at that. Totally had it. So I'll have to find a little bit of foam for that. I don't know if you could buy a proper air filter for it, but we'll be able to cut a piece of foam for it. I'll have to get the rest of that out shortly. I'll probably just clean that out now, and then I'll run the thing for a while to warm it up, and we'll drain the oil. Now, the drain plugs here, quite often they don't provide good access for draining. We can get to that easy enough, but of course if we just let the oil trickle out there, it's going to run all the way over the cylinder and make a big mess. So I've just got a plastic bottle here out of my recycle bin, and I'm just going to cut a section of plastic to slip up under there, and it'll work as kind of just a drain, and we can then get the oil away without making a mess. So I'll cut that bottle down now. We'll give it a run for a while, and then we'll drain the oil, and I'll get the rest of this foam out of here. So I've cut a piece of section out of that bottle, as you can see, poked it up under there. It should flow down nicely. I've loosened this this bung here, so we'll pull that out. We saw from the level that there's the right amount of oil in it, and God knows when it was last changed. Perhaps he doesn't even know. There's a fair chance that this oil is what's been in it since brand new. Most people do not look after their air compressors. They tend to be a forgotten piece of equipment. So that's draining all down there quite nicely. And as you can see, it looks quite clean. It looks like new oil, but what you'll find is that compressor oil and machinery oil doesn't go black like sump oil does, because you don't have the unburnt fuels and the carbon build-up that gets down past the rings, especially diesels. Diesel oil will go black very quickly. So you don't have that sort of colour indicator on machinery oil to say, all right, it's old, it needs replacing, this looks new. But of course you still have wear to the bearings, you have wear to the piston. You're going to get fine metal fragments, microscopic granted, but there's still going to be metal fragments in this oil. And if it's not changed, even though it looks nice, it's eventually going to turn into a grinding paste and wear your equipment out very quickly. So it is important to change your oil regardless of how it looks. And if your compressor is used a lot, once a year is probably a good idea just to drain the oil out. It doesn't take much to do. And as for the oil to replace, I've got some compressor oil here. You're supposed to use a synthetic oil in these compressors, and any sort of gearbox situation, I think a synthetic oil is good. You don't want a detergent oil because it will foam up, and we'll talk about filling it in a tick, making sure it's the right level. But yeah, just you're best buying a compressor oil because it's made for the job and it will handle the temperatures that the compressor will get to. So we'll just leave that drain a bit longer, and then we just have to, what we probably should do is just take the filler plug out. It just helps get a bit of airflow through and it will drain quicker. And the oil was warm to touch because I had it running for a little while. I've also just chocked up the other wheels just to give us a little bit more slope, so it should all drain out fairly quickly. While we're letting the oil drain, we've got a bit of pressure in here. Let's check the pressure gauge. I ran it for about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, and we've got, it looks like just over 75 psi, about 6 bar. So it's got a fair bit of pressure in there. There's no leaks. We can't hear any hissing now that it's off. So that's good. I think all these hoses and fittings will be okay. Now we do need to check the relief valve, which is a safety valve on these compressors, or any air compressor, in that the tanks are built to withstand enormous pressures, well in excess of what you're going to need. But if they are neglected and do go rusty from having water in them, they're going to obviously have a reduced capacity. There still should be plenty in reserve, because of course you don't want to have the thing running until the thing explodes. You have a pressure switch here, which I took the cover off again because I'll do a little bit of adjustment there. So that switch will turn the motor off when it gets to a certain pressure. But if for some reason that goes faulty or sticks and your tank is a little bit weaker, they always have a pressure relief valve, and this one is just in here. So it's a good idea to make sure that's free. I'll just use some pliers on the end of this and give it a bit of a pull. And you can hear that that releases fine. So that's an extra safety that all compressors, they probably legally are required to have. I'm not totally sure on that, but I'm sure, I would imagine they would be. So always check, find where your pressure relief valve is, and just make sure it's operational, because that's a safety, a very important safety feature. So all right, it looks like the oil's nearly finished draining out. So we'll put the plug back in, and we'll put some of our compressor oil in. I'll probably find a little funnel to do that so that we don't make a mess. We've removed our plastic drain piece. Better not forget to tighten this bung up. With the appropriately sized ring spanner. It is actually a brass bung there, and if you're using a shifter or multi-grips on brass, you'll soon wear the corners off, so always grab the right size ring spanner. So now we'll take it off the chock of wood, get it level, and we'll find a little funnel and refill it. And now just refilling the oil. It didn't hold much. You saw how much came out. There's probably only about 100 mil, a little bit over 100 mil maybe. So we'll just put a little bit in, let it drain down, keep an eye on the level. We could have measured it into a measuring jug and then poured it in, but you can see that level's just starting to come up towards that center circle. It needs to be halfway across. Now, I mentioned before about filling with oil. As far as quantities go, you do not want to overfill a compressor. They don't have pressure lubrication, they just rely on a splash system, and the correct level is critical. Same with many small engines that don't have pressure lubrication. You can see that's almost up to half now. In fact, if we let it drain down, I think that'll be perfectly fine. So too much oil is almost as bad as not enough, because if it's higher than it should be in the crankcase, you're splashing parts which are often a little dipper on the end of the connecting rod that goes onto the crank. If the level's not right, it won't splash properly. You won't get a good distribution of oil all round to the base of the piston and everything. It'll tend to froth up and bubble, and because you don't get lubrication into certain parts, it actually can wear out certain parts by having too much oil. It seems sort of counterproductive, but too much oil isn't a very good thing at all. If consequently not enough oil, you're not going to get oil too. So you do have to have the right level. That looks spot on to me. Nice fresh clean compressor oil. We can take our little funnel out, put the filler cap back in, and our compressor now is right to go. Servicing on these, if you don't use your compressor very much, you don't need to change the oil, every 12 months or so, I don't think, because it doesn't get contaminated with carbon and such as an engine does. So it's only going to get impurities from metal wear, and if you don't use your compressor very much, you're not going to get a lot of metal wear. So oil change doesn't have to be as often as perhaps other maintenance, like certainly draining the tank of water is much more important. Likewise, checking the air filter, which we still have to do. But otherwise, we're pretty right to go here. So we'll do the air filter next. And you can't just stick any old piece of foam in there, because it's not going to filter the air properly. I'll just walk around this side again. Now, I had an old lawnmower in the backyard of my shop, a Briggs & Stratton, and it was no good. But the air filter out of that has got good foam. Hasn't broken down. It's still quite spongy, and I'll be able to get a circle out of that part, which will fit in to this housing here, and that will be a good quality foam to use as an air filter. Okay, so I've cut a rough circle out of that. It will be fine. It seems to fit in nicely. And what I've done is I've just dipped it in a bit of two-stroke fuel. A bit of fuel for my chainsaw here. Two-stroke fuel, of course, has oil in it. So I've just dipped it in, I've squeezed it through, and now I'm just letting it dry out, because we don't want volatile fumes being sucked into a compressor. But what it does is it leaves a very light film of oil through the foam, which really does go a long way to capturing any dust. So when you're servicing a foam air filter, I like to just dip them in a two-stroke oil, squeeze them out. It gets any muck out of it. There's a little bit dirty on the bottom, but it's still not too bad. And we'll just leave that dry before we put it in, but it's going to press in there nicely. It'll seal up, it'll filter the air brilliantly. Certainly a lot better than what we had. So there you go. That's a bit of a hack as far as an air filter goes. Most well-known, common branded compressors, you'd be able to order an air filter to suit it perfectly. You're probably best to do that. This one being a very old model, I doubt I'd find one, and it'd take me too long to research it anyway. So we'll put this air filter in a tick, and pretty well we can put the belt back on. We've checked everything we need to check. I don't want this video to go too long, but it's just basic maintenance, and I'm hopefully talking through any questions you may have. Feel free to ask any more below if you'd like to know anything else. The only thing I'm going to do is just adjust the pressure switch here, because the compressor cuts out at, I don't know, I'm probably going to get it to switch off at around about 100 psi. That will run anything that I want to run fine, and probably cut back in. Let's have a look at the gauge. It's still holding pressure beautifully from when we ran it before. So if I maybe run it up to 100, and then it comes back in at perhaps where it is now. That should be fine. So I'll just adjust the settings for that. You don't want it too close between the cut out and the cut in, otherwise the compressor's switching on and off all the time. So it's just a matter of adjusting that. If you've got your own compressor and you know it's working fine, you won't need to touch that. It's because I haven't owned this one before and I haven't used it that I'm just making sure everything's right. All right, I don't think I need to go on about anything else. Thanks for watching. Hope you've got a little bit out of this little maintenance exercise. And of course we fixed the motor up, so we're all running. I'll now put the guards back on, fit it under my bench, and then I'm right to use it in my workshop. All right, we'll see you in the next video. Bye.